Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Rundown. I will be your host today, Craig DeLuz, coming at you from the West Coast, the left coast, behind the Iron Curtain, otherwise known as the Sierras. And today is Monday Fun Day.
I stop what you're doing, cause I'm about to ruin the image of me that you're used to. I look money, a king bee making honey, see? Deep state, I hope you're ready for me. Now gather round, I'm the new sheriff in town. All my people rise up and stand your ground. Now drink up all the Diet Coke you got on your shelf. So just let me introduce myself, my name is Trump D. I like my mashed potatoes lumpy. Fake news, oh how I like to punk thee. That little sniper on the slope tin, he took a shot but he missed me. I don't fall, y'all, I'm like the ever-ready bunny. Still going strong and spunky. So put on your big boy pants. Come on, let's do the dance.
Trumpy dance is your chance to do the Trump.
Come on, do the Trumpty Trump. Come on and do the Trumpty Trump. Check me out, y'all. We do the Trumpty Trump. Just watch me do the Trumpty Trump. Do you know what I'm doing? We do the Trumpty Trump. Come on, everybody do the Trumpty Trump. It's time to do the Trumpty Trump. Yeah.
That's right, folks. We're doing the Trumpty Trump because as long as Trump is winning, America is winning. You and I are winning. So all is good in the hood. Now, I have to admit, today's program is pre-recorded. When I say pre-recorded, I recorded about an hour or two before our normal airtime because, well, we have the California School Boards Association conference, their annual education conference is this week. And I'm usually there live during the time that we're doing this program. We have our delegate assembly during this time. Anyway, point being, there are some days this week where we're going to be live. There's some days this week where it's going to be pre-recorded, either a news program like we're going to do today, just talking about the updated news, or maybe a pre-recorded interview that we've done from the Gun Rights Policy Conference. But we're going to be here every day this week. We'll have something for you. Unfortunately, we may not necessarily be here live. And because we're pre-recording, Mike wasn't able to make it. So it's just going to be me. It's just going to be you, because guess what? Just because I'm not monitoring your comments doesn't mean you can't still leave your comments. Would still love to hear what you have to say, what you think about the content, what you think about the topics that we're talking about. If you got any intel, feel free to go ahead and leave a link in the comment section. Would love to hear from you very, very much. So let's go ahead on that note and get into the program. And you know how we always start it. That's right. We always start with a quick shout out to our sponsors. We'll start with the folks over at Hitman Industries. They sell rifle and pistol caliber barrels. They are available at any length. If you are looking to do either a brand new build or maybe you're looking to rebarrel your old rifle, trust me, there's no better place that you can start than with Hitman Industries at hitmanindustries.net. And then we've got the California Republican Assembly working to help elect conservatives at all level of government, from school board all the way up to President of the United States. In fact, Ronald Reagan once referred to CRA as the conscience of the Republican Party. So you need to check them out today. Just go to cragop.org. That's cragop.org. If you want to be a part of California's future today, you got to join CRA. And then we've got the best in concealed carry tactical holsters available on the market. You will find them at hogholsters.com. All you have to do is go to hogholsters.com. That's HAWG holsters.com. Check them out. And when you do, make sure you use the discount code The Rundown if you decide to buy. That's that word right up there, The Rundown, all caps, one word, no spaces. And you're going to get a nifty little discount on your hog holster today. That's helping Americans wear guns. And then finally, with the change in weather, obviously it's getting a little cooler in most places in the country. Obviously, it's time to take a look and see what tactical gear you need to update. And let me tell you, if you're a group, if you have a department, if you have an agency, trust me, you need to check out uscombatgear.com. They specialize in group sales. They have a huge selection of products. They have competitive pricing, once again, specializing in group sales, and the best customer service available on the market. Go there now, where you will find all things tactical except the holster. I'm sorry, except the holster. All things tactical except the gun. And that would be uscombatgear.com. Oh, that was real easy for me to say, wasn't it? All right, we're leading today because we're going to be talking about gun rights. That's right. So for those of you who are unaware, the Rundown actually started. Mike hosts a program hosts a radio show called Arms Room Radio. For years, I did what was a program called Morning Coffee with Craig for the Firearms Policy Coalition, we met and decided we were hanging out and we're hanging out together, and either he'd host whenever we did conferences, he'd co-host my show or I'd co-host his show, and we decided we wanted to do something different than guns. And so we want to talk about other things, other politics, other policy issues other than just guns. So we said, let's start a program called The Rundown, and that started in 2020. Well, suffice it to say, well, here we are now, and uh, we're always looking for good gun stories. So the reason why this story in particular is leading is because this has been a something that an idea of mine that I've literally had for well over a decade. And this has to do with the Department of Justice actually establishing an office dealing specifically with gun rights within the Department of Justice, right? In other words, in particular within the Civil Rights Department. There's one dealing with guns within the Justice Department. It's called the ATF, but one specifically that would deal with companies, organizations, or specifically municipalities, local governments that violated the civil rights of Americans when it came to the right to keep and bear arms. You see, civil rights, contrary to what many people would have you believe, civil rights are not the special rights for special people based on your race, based on your gender identity, or your religion. Civil rights are the rights due to each and every one of us as citizens in this country, right? And chief among those, and I say chief among those because it's not maybe not the first in the Bill of Rights, but it is the second, and that would be the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. And what's often happened in many, many cities, in many, many states, too many of both, uh, the right to keep and bear arms has been undermined by local government. In other words, they're flat out violating your right to keep and bear arms. And in some cases, they're violating other rights because you want to exercise your right to keep and bear arms. And there's no better example of that than red flag laws. If I had to tell you why red flag laws violate, you know, the right to not just the right to keep and bear arms, but the right to freedom of speech, the right to due process, the right to be innocent until proven guilty, the right to face your accuser. If I have to explain all of that, they would take an entire show. I'm not going to go through that. You can look at past programs or just leave in the comments, and I'll send you a link to some of the ones where we talk about that. But here, what we're specifically talking about, though, is now the development of a department that is going to investigate federal law, federal departments, right? That is going to look at local municipalities, state law, local jurisdiction ordinances that violate our fundamental right to keep and bear arms and take action on behalf of the people. And this here being reported by the folks over at Reuters. It says U.S. Justice Department plans gun rights office within civil rights unit. The Justice Department plans to expand gun rights protections with a new office in its Civil Rights Division dedicated to enforcing U.S. constitutional right to bear arms. It should be to keep and bear arms, according to plans shared with Congress and reviewed by Reuters. The office, called the Second Amendment Rights Section, expected to open on December 4th and will be dedicated to investigating local laws or policies limiting gun rights. The section intends to execute the broad policy directions from February executive order issued by President Donald Trump directing Attorney General Pam Bondi to comb the entire U.S. government to assess any ongoing infringements of gun rights. The Second Amendment of the United States of the U.S. Constitution enshrines the right to keep and bear arms, a deeply divisive issue in a nation where many conservatives avidly support gun rights while many liberals push for restrictions in the face of high rate of gun-related deaths. There have been 378 mass shootings this year as of November 25th. That was when this article was written. According to Gun Rights Violence Archive, we won't even get into them. A comprehensive database of gun-related incidents in the U.S., which defines mass shooting events where 4 or more people are killed or wounded, excluding the shooter. The recognition is another step in a series of actions by the Trump administration to redefine civil rights with policies championed by conservatives, a departure from traditional civil rights issues, including racial discrimination and policing. The DOJ did not immediately comment. Now, here's a quote from someone who used to work there. It says the Civil Rights Division's new focus on the Second Amendment, which is far outside its longstanding mission, is moving us even further away from our nation's commitment to protecting all Americans' civil rights, said Stacey Young, former Civil Rights Division attorney. Now, folks, let us be clear, and I'm going to make this very clear to you, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Civil rights are due to each and every one of us. What's happened is that the left and weak-kneed Republicans have allowed the term civil rights to be hijacked. See, if you look at it, what she's talking about is she doesn't want to make sure that all rights are available to all people. She wants to make sure that certain rights are available to people of color, people based on their gender, people based on their gender identity. So, in other words, if you are a Christian white male, the Department of Civil Rights has nothing to do with you as far as they are concerned. Civil rights has nothing to do with you as far as they are concerned. And that's just not the case. That's just not what civil rights were ever really meant to be. Because here's the thing. If you have a right to keep and bear arms, everybody has that right to keep and bear arms. You're protecting the rights for everybody. Because one of the things that the Department of Civil Rights has, or this agency of civil rights has done, is it's made sure that if you are a white Protestant male, that you don't get a right to fully access your rights, that you don't have the sorts of protections that a person of color does or that a person who is transgender does. I don't have a right. I mean, when you can be prosecuted for burning a pride flag, but not the American flag, I want you to think about that. If you can burn a gay pride flag, if you can get in trouble for burning a gay pride flag, but you don't get in trouble for burning a white pride flag, well, then how is that equal? How is that equal rights under the law? Now, don't get me wrong. I give a hoot about white pride, but my point that I'm making here is that rights are supposed to apply to everybody. The laws are supposed to be applied to everyone equally. And one of the things that we are seeing is that the Second Amendment, the second of our Bill of Rights, have people actively fighting against its right to exist, against its right to be implemented. You have people putting laws in place that specifically undermine it. And what Donald Trump is saying, what Harmeet Dillon is saying, what Pam Bondi is saying, but for those of you who do not know, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, U.S. Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights is Harmeet Dillon, from the state of California and a big Second Amendment advocate. What they're saying is that civil rights belong to everybody. And if you can't defend the right to keep and bear arms, then you can't defend any of them. Right? The two main civil rights that the Trump administration has been fighting to defend and is taking up arms for is the right to freedom of speech, meaning you can't be silenced, you can't be, not being doxxed, or the sorts of things that people are doing to people who actually are just expressing their views and their values. Having the government actually both investigate you, having the government come down on you or have you silenced because you have a position that is contrary to the governmental narrative, as well as the right to keep and bear arms, your right to be able to defend yourself. And when they talk about all of these quote unquote gun deaths, let's be clear, 2/3 of them are suicides. 2/3 of them are people killing themselves. And here's what's funny. I heard this joke the other day, and it was the funniest thing. This guy pointed out that, like something like 30,000 people, and that's not funny, but 30,000 people die every year related to gun deaths, or there's 30,000 gun deaths. It's over that now. It's like somewhere like 33, 34. But the interesting part was he said 40,000 people trip and fall every year, die from tripping and falling. So one is a constant. So So one is the thing, it's an epidemic that we need to deal with, and the other, well, mm, oh well. Funny joke. If you probably anyway, I'll just leave that alone. But anyway, all that having been said, um, I think it's great that they're doing this. Like I said, I've been calling for it for over a decade. I, very much would like for those of y'all out there who maybe know some folks out there. I've reached out, but I would love to be. If there's a way to get in to be a part of this, I would love to be a part of a work like this. It is. I actually I became a gun owner relatively, when I say late in life, I was 40 when I bought my first gun. And I got into gun rights because I wanted to be a responsible gun owner. And when I really understood, I was already working in politics, working in policy. And when I really understood all of the laws that were put in place and the restrictions that were put in place, I realized that our fundamental rights, especially in places like California, it was being highly restricted. I mean, when it says thou shalt not infringe, places like the state of California were directly ignoring that because they were totally infringing on our right to keep and bear arms. And that is eventually what got me involved in the gun rights movement, working with the Firearms Policy Coalition, got me involved as a lobbyist, got me involved as a media personality, because I believe if you can't defend the basics of civil rights, then none of the rest of them are safe. If you can't defend the right to keep and bear arms, the right to freedom of speech, and the right to due process, nothing is safe. Absolutely, positively, nothing is safe. So, hats off to Pam Bondi. Once again, I've told you, I've had my concerns about Pam Bondi, but this is another feather in her cap for her. She's got some issues in the past when it comes to Second Amendment, but I believe she's taken some steps to make it right. She's working on rectifying it. And Harmeet Dillon has always been a phenomenal supporter of the Second Amendment. So hats off to Harmeet Dillon. Once again, Harmeet, give your boy a call. I'd love to come help. Not saying, just saying. You need some help, I'm your guy. Just saying. All right. Another big story that is in the news today has to do with the fraud, the billions of dollars of fraud from COVID era money, from autism money that's been taking place, specifically targeting, specifically when it has to do with the Somali community. Now, what's interesting is that Tim Walz actually has come out, and what's funny is, so there's a whistleblower who has come out and said, yeah, no, this is 100% Tim Walz's fault. But Tim Walz, before we get into talking about the whistleblower, Tim Walz is directly coming out and blaming the Trump administration for the problem.
Fraud is the reason for his crackdown. Dozens of people of East African descent have been charged, convicted, and sentenced for stealing more than $1 billion in taxpayer money from government programs during COVID. As you know, Governor, that is more than Minnesota spends each year to run its Department of Corrections. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy. And as you heard Senator Kelly say, this president has cut a lot of inspector generals. He's cut programs that could help us tackle this on. So we'll take it on. We'll put folks in jail. I don't care what your nationality is. I don't care what your religion is, your color. If you're committing crimes, these are programs that were meant to serve students with autism, to housing, and to making sure people had enough to eat. There's a reason Minnesota ranks as the top, lowest childhood poverty, best place for children to live. People are taking advantage of that. They're going to prison. That is totally disconnected with demonizing an entire group of people who came here fleeing civil war and created a vibrant community that makes Minnesota and this country better. But that's Donald Trump.
So let's be clear. You heard kind of once again, him defending this particular community. defending the problem. But here's the challenge: is that it is that position of defense, that knee jerk reaction, that according to whistleblowers, is the reason why they believe that this fraud, this massive fraud, is 100. He's 100% responsible for it. This is being reported by the folks over at Breitbart. It says hundreds of Minnesota government workers have accused the state's leftist governor of being responsible for a massive fraud case that has drawn tons of attention. The statement came from over 400 individuals in the Minnesota Department of Health and Human Service employees X page on Saturday, Fox News reported Sunday. The group claimed it alerted Governor Tim Walz to fraud in the early stages of discovery, but he allegedly retaliated against whistleblowers. Now, this, I believe, is from this right here, I believe, is from the folks over at let's see where it's from. Anyway, I think this is from the Fox News article. It says here Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. Oh no, this is from the tweet. Okay, the Twitter page or the X page. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. Tim Walz systematically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation by Tim Walz, certain DFL members, and an indifferent mainstream media. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can turn to. In addition to retaliating against whistleblower, Tim Walz disempowered the Office of Legislative Auditor, allowing agencies to disregard their audit findings and guidance. Media and politicians supporting Tim Walz or the DFL agenda attacked whistleblowers who were trying to raise red flags of fraudulent activities. Somalis in Minnesota allegedly took millions of dollars in state Medicaid autism care programs and sent it to their native country and its terrorist organizations, per Breitbart News. The outlet's November 20 article noted Breitbart reported in July that nearly 100 autism clinics in Minnesota are being investigated for fraudulently billing Medicaid for treatment of children supposedly diagnosed with autism, most of it in connection with the rampant corrupt Somali community around Minneapolis. But the fraud is far more widespread and far more money involved than was previously reported. And oh no, all of which has been presided over by former Democrat Party vice presidential nominee Governor Tim Walz. Yeah, so these are people who are within, I'm assuming they say employees, so I'm assuming this is the union. I could be wrong, but these are employees who have said that they've come together, they've tried to alert, they tried to alert the administration that these things were going on, and they tried early on in the process. And they were basically demonized. They were basically gone after. They were basically threatened with a retaliation. My guess is that they were probably told, if you keep doing these discriminatory things, we're going to have you, you're going to lose your job. What I'm going to guess that they wound up doing. And as a result, nothing happened. And as a result, now we see that, billions of dollars got stolen. And by the way, it wasn't just the Somali community, I will say that, but there's a lot of links and a lot of ties, and there's a disproportionate amount of the investigations, a disproportionate amount of the money that has disappeared into these Somali organizations and gone back to Somalia. Now, keep in mind where they're coming from. This is a society that is, well, let's just say Ain't too many Somalis trying to rush back to Somalia. They're not trying to rush back to live there because it is a place that is fraught with corruption. It is a place that is fraught with poverty. And, this is stuff like this is probably commonplace there. Well, probably not commonplace because there's not a lot of money to be stolen. Instead, they have things like Somali pirates, right? Who try to steal from people who are in the seas near Somalia. In any case, um, yeah, you got a guy who wants to be or is trying to be a nominee for, you know, president, in 2028, who basically is going out there and lying because he doesn't want to own the fact that yeah, we messed this up. And the funny part about it is I honestly believe that, the American people are very forgiving. You say, "You know what? We dropped the ball on this. We were so eager." I would have said we were so eager to try and help kids that we didn't put appropriate checks and but we didn't have appropriate checks and balances in place. Well, now we're going to fix it. That's what he should do. Own it, move on. And by the time the election comes, most people will be like, "Oh, okay, well they'll move on from it," because he's owned it, but he won't own it. He won't own it. And here's the thing: to me, the only reason not to own it, there's nothing wrong with owning mistakes. It's just if you were complicit in fraud, that's the reason not to own it. And it wouldn't surprise me one bit if it were to come out that yeah, a lot of that money wound up in his campaign coffers, or at the very least, it wound up in the campaign coffers of some of his allies. Anyway. Moving right along, fellow unit member says DC shooter felt abandoned by the CIA. Now, there were a lot of people who got left in Afghanistan. You might recall the shooter, the gentleman who shot the two National Guardsmen, one of which who's since passed. The other is still fighting for his life. According to Rolling Stone magazine, this guy evidently, so he worked with the CIA while he was in Afghanistan. He was part of what's called their zero units that helped to, go after specific targets. So evidently he worked with us, got cleared and came here. But according to a lot of folks, he basically was radicalized once he got here. And they believe that some of the radicalization had to do with this. Now, I always take what Rolling Stone says with a grain of salt, but I always find that when you take it with a grain of salt, it doesn't mean that there's absolutely no truth in what they're saying. So it says here, fellow unit member says alleged DC shooter felt abandoned by the CIA. The alleged shooter of two National Guard members was struggling with mental illness, his ability to support his family, and according to an Afghan veteran who fought with him, his pleas for help to the CIA went unanswered. Lakanwal, a 29-year-old Afghan national, served in a CIA-backed Afghan force unit known as Zero Units in Kandahar. He is facing first-degree murder charges after Army specialist Sarah Beckstrom, 20, died of her injuries following the Wednesday shooting near Farragut West Metro Station in Washington, D.C. Air Force Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, 24, remains in critical condition. Investigators are still working to establish a motive for the attack. Rolling Stone spoke with a former Afghan unit mate who pointed to financial pressure and ongoing apparent mental illness as a contributing factor. He also seems to have felt abandoned by the United States government. Quote, he's very sad, said Lakwal's Afghan unit mate. He who is not a native English speaker. He's very worried. The problem, like he'd say, I am working 9 years or 10 years with the U.S. government, and they never answer my phone call. The Taliban prevailed in America's longest-running war. Laqwan resettled in after the Taliban prevailed. No, they didn't prevail. We surrendered. Anyway, resettled in Bellingham, Washington. By the way, a very, very expensive place in the state of Washington to live. With his wife and 5 sons in September 2021. His migration was aided by Operation Allies. well, I'm sorry, Operation Allies Welcome, a Biden area initiative to resettle vulnerable Afghans, particularly those who worked alongside U.S. forces and face reprisals from the Taliban. The struggles to start over, leave the war behind, and find work were ever present. Like he was fired from his job at a laundromat because he lacked a work authorization card, despite being approved for asylum and authorized to work by the Trump administration, according to his former unit mate, who fought alongside him for more than a decade. In September, his nephew requested that the Bellingham House Authority approve a move closer to an Afghan community. The handwritten application, reviewed by Rolling Stone, cited his isolation, lack of English skills, and the need to find employment in a larger community like Seattle. He didn't feel safe in Bellingham after he was assaulted when a man sprayed something into his eyes, uh, requiring hospital treatment, according to an application. Quote, this experience has caused him stress and fear, and he does not feel comfortable continuing to live in this town, the nephew wrote. It is very important for him to be near his community and relatives and feel safe and have the opportunity to find work so he can support his family. So, in other words, much like we did for many of the folks who aided us in Afghanistan, who were in fact left in Afghanistan, uh, some of the folks that we brought here, we left abandoned. Now, mind you, this guy didn't come across the southern border. If he had been an illegal immigrant, if he had come through illegally, he probably would have gotten all the help and resources that he needed, or at least he would have got into a homeless shelter. At least he would have got him an Obama phone, and or Biden would have switched him to a Biden phone. Anyway, um, here's the thing: number one, we owe these guys, these folks, something. These people who helped us, we owe them something. I don't know that we owe them everything, but we do at least owe them a return phone call. I would say if they have need, if they're in assistance, maybe there's nothing that we can do, but at the very least, we ought to be returning the calls of folks. And I'll say this: I don't know about so I don't know what exactly went into the vetting, but we probably really need to take a look at the vetting. And when people are putting out pleas saying that issues are going on, perhaps the people like, I don't know, the CIA, the people who are tasked with resettling these folks should actually listen, because clearly what happened didn't happen in a vacuum, right? There were definitely issues that someone should have known about. Now, once again, in the end, I still blame the person who did the shooting. He is the person who needs to be held responsible. I think they're also looking at the people who know him and the people who were part of to see how or if he was actually radicalized, or if this was just dude just got frustrated because he couldn't find the job. And because coming from where he came from, I imagine that it's not easy trying to figure stuff out here because it's completely different culture. I'm not totally familiar with the Washington State. For those of you who are, go ahead and maybe you can either back me up or correct me on this. But the city where he wound up, I think it's Bellingham. It's yeah, Bellingham. It's pretty. It's not very diverse. It's also very expensive part of Washington to live in, and to be there and not have a job. Yeah, that can be very stressful, especially with the spouse and kids. So, one, I would have probably really rethought about the idea of resettling him someplace that expensive, someplace that far away from any other, the Afghan community. Uh, if this story is correct, this just sounds like bad follow through. That sounds like bad follow through, and we need to do better. But I am not closing the door on the idea that there could be a lot more to this. But I'm also open to the idea that this may have just been it, and he may just have lost his stuff. Anyway, my main point is, uh, could this have been avoided? Could it have been prevented? Quite possibly, and we'll find out more later. But yeah, probably. And I don't know that closing the border. I do know that we need to make sure that our vetting processes work, right? This guy was, when he first came over, whatever vetting the Biden administration did, he was granted asylum in April. Now, keep in mind, in April, President Trump had been president for all of 2.5 months, and unless he ended everything right then, I doubt that the vetting process took place within those 2.5 months. My guess is the vetting process took place before that under the Biden administration. Probably would have been a good idea to say, look, let's shut down any of these asylum, let's take a look at the vetting and make sure we're doing proper vetting. Hindsight is 2020. Now we know that hopefully that's exactly what the president is doing now. He's going to say, stop. Let's take a look at the vetting process before we reopen it and make sure we're doing all that we need to do to make sure that we're vetting people properly. I'm guessing that's what the president is doing, not just saying, we're not doing any more immigration. Because first of all, I don't know that he has the ability to do that. I mean, permanently. I don't know that he has the ability to do that permanently, but all that having been said, I think that what he's doing is making sure that our vetting, that if we're not in the middle of doing the work, if we stop the work, we can take a look at the process and make sure the process works. And not just the vetting process, but the follow-through process. So the guys like this don't, if this story is correct, and it basically comes down to what Rolling Stone has reported, that guys like this don't fall through the cracks because, now we see what the worst. Well, I don't know if this is the worst case scenario, but this is definitely not far from the worst case scenario of what could happen in cases like that. All right, moving right along. Final one. UK is scrapping trial by jury. Now, folks, this is a very, very bad idea. This is a horrible idea. Much of our jurisprudence, much of our legal system is based on British common law. And to see the direction that they are heading, this could be a tremendous loss of liberty. According to Breitbart, biggest assault on our liberties in 800 years. UK abolishing trial by jury threatens freedom of speech. Freedom of speech will be under even greater threat if the British government is able to do away with jury trials for almost all cases because legal studies show a judge sitting alone is far more likely to convict defendants in free speech than juries, the Free Speech Union warns. The Free Speech Union warns the United Kingdom risks losing, quote, a check on governmental power and arbitrary justice in the biggest assault on our liberties in 800 years. If the government is able to push ahead this week with plans said to be looking to abolish the right to a trial by jury in all but the most serious cases, such as murder, rape, terrorism, and others. For many other criminal cases where defendants face considerable jail time, the chance to have their guilt assessed by their peers hangs in the balance as Justice Secretary David Lammy looks for a cut cost way to clear a backlog in cases, and the union warns freedom of expression cases are particularly threatened. In statistics cited by the FSU and reproduced by the Daily Telegraph, the union said legal studies had found defendants in free speech cases are twice as likely to be acquitted by a jury than those who had sat in a court without. A statement by the union said, quote, according to legal studies, jury trials provide a more balanced outcome with higher acquittal rates in cases that might otherwise be influenced heavily by prosecutorial bias. Moreover, juries often bring diverse perspectives, which lead to fairer judgments compared to decisions by a single judge who might have biases. So, and I think that's an important thing. The reality is all of us have biases. When you have a jury, you have a chance to diversify against those biases, unless you wind up having a jury trial in a place like Manhattan, and you have a place that is overwhelmingly hates a particular president or a particular former president, and that president comes up for trial, and you have prosecutors who are looking to undermine that. Anyway, the problem is, and here's the thing: I, jury by trial or trial by jury is not perfect, but it at the very least gives you an opportunity uh, to be heard by a jury of your peers. Uh, Judges, more and more, we're finding are less and less impartial as we would like them as we would like to believe they are. We would like to believe that they're impartial, but they're not, and they actually do tend to have a prosecutorial bias in many cases, meaning they're more likely to believe if a cop testifies, they're more likely to believe a law enforcement officer than they are a civilian. They're more likely to uh, give evidence provided by the prosecution more deference and more credibility than they are those who are than they are the defendants. Whereas as juries balance that out a little bit more. And I'll tell you, I two different cases where I for me, and this is once again this is my personal experience. The one time I almost wound up on a jury. The reason I got kicked off was because I said that I was n- I did not give any additional credibility to a law enforcement officer's testimony than I did an average citizen's testimony. In other words, I know that law enforcement officers are human, they are fallible, and some are dishonest. Not all, not even most. But I would require the same sort of facts and specifics backing up their account as I would the average citizen. I wouldn't give them less credit. I wouldn't give them more credit. I would have higher expectations for them only because this is their job to be able to provide that sort of information and data and whatnot. But I would not. I mean, if a citizen came up and had the same exact information, I would be, I would weigh that information the same. That was one instance. The other was an instance where I literally, and this was a court case. This was just a traffic court case, but I pled not guilty because here's what happened. So I was looking for the DMB, right? I had my phone out and I was looking at the map application, and I got pulled over. And at the time, I thought that just having your phone out was a crime in California. I thought it was brilliant. So the guy asked me, I pulled you over because you were on your phone. I said, well, I was trying to find the DMV. He's like, well, it's illegal. So he gave me my ticket and everything. And then I went and I looked it up. And at the time, the only things that were illegal to do was to either be on the phone talking with somebody or to be texting somebody. Those are the only two things. So you could be using an app like MapQuest or Google Maps in this case, and it's not a crime. It's not illegal. So that was my defense. When I went in, I took my phone records, both the phone calls as well as the text messages, and I said, this was the time in which I was pulled over. If you look, there are no text messages being sent. There are no phone calls being made during this period. You see that this phone is in my name. And the judge basically assumed that, well, I don't know that this is your phone. And I said, you can call the number. He basically threw out my evidence. Oh, by the way, I also cited the law that specifically noted that what was illegal. And he said, well, but he's like, you didn't contest it at the time. I said, I didn't contest it because at the time I thought that using the app was against the law. Now it turns out it's not. Anyway, I still wound up having to pay the ticket because once again, he just didn't believe me. He had a prosecutorial bias. So with that, I'm like, yeah, okay. So I see that. So yeah, no, we need to not get rid of jury trials. That is not something that we ought to be supporting. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen because every time some stuff like this happens, they're like, oh, well, we need to be doing the same thing here in the United States. I'm like, yeah, no, no, we shouldn't. So anyway, that's definitely something worth keeping an eye on. All right, folks, that now brings us to our parting shots. Parting shots are brought to you by Hog Holsters. Just go to hogholsters.com. Use the discount code The Rundown. All caps, no spaces, one word. Get your Hog Holster today. All right, our first one, or all of these, by the way, are going to be coming to you by the Babylon Bee, fake news that you can trust. And this first one here. Tim Walz offers journalists free tampons to stop talking about his fraud scandal. There you go. I know. Here's another one. This one is also now. This one is relevant only because she's also from the state of Minnesota. Ilhan Omar argues she should be able to stay in horrible country she hates. Yeah, which is odd because she seems to really hate America, but yet and still, she still has absolutely no problem wanting to stay here. I don't get that. Anyway, I digress. And then finally, Chicago judge hoping 23rd time is the charm for rehabilitating a violent criminal. This is in response to the lady who, well, let's just say, or the gentleman who had already been arrested 23 times and got out and was on an ankle monitor and burnt a lady alive there in Chicago. Yeah, sad stuff. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of our program. Let's go ahead and give a final shout out to our sponsors. Hitman Industries, you'll find them at hitmanindustries.net. Rifle and pistol caliber barrels available for you to purchase at any length. The California Republican Assembly, the conscience of the Republican Party. Check them out at cragop.org. You've got the best in concealed carry tactical holsters available on the market at hogholsters.com. And then finally, you've got the place where you can find all things tactical except the gun. And that would be at uscombatgear.com. All right, folks, that's going to be it for today. I make no guarantees about what you're going to get tomorrow. All I know is that you're going to get some content tomorrow. So hopefully, well, I doubt it will be live. Let me just be clear. It will not be live. So you may get a program like this tomorrow with me and Mike, program like this tomorrow with just me. You may get a pre-recorded interview from the Gun Rights Policy Conference, but you will get something. So tune in tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. We will holler at you mañana.